When I turned 67, I never imagined that at my father's funeral, my husband would lock me out of the home I thought was ours. But that's exactly what happened. I stood there outside with a cold wind brushing against my face, trying to wrap my mind around it. I had spent my whole life building a family, supporting my husband Carl, raising our children, and now here I was, left in the cold after the death of my father, excluded from a life I thought I shared with him. Carl, the man I had stood beside for 40 years, who promised we would grow old together, didn't even seem to care. The condo we had shared, the condo that was now worth $30 million, was not just a piece of real estate, it was the heart of everything we had built, and yet it was now a symbol of betrayal. The door slammed shut in my face, and for a brief moment, I thought I had imagined it. But no, Carl wasn't joking. He stood on the other side, behind the thick wooden door, acting like he didn't even know me. I had always known that Carl could be a bit distant at times, especially when work took over his life, but this was something I couldn't ignore. I tried to knock again, but the silence on the other side of the door was deafening. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of everything I had lost pressing down on me. The grief of losing my father was one thing, but the betrayal I felt from Carl, the man I had shared my life with, was something else entirely. How could he do this to me, especially at a time like this? The anger started to build inside me, but it was replaced quickly by a deep sadness. I had spent my life taking care of everyone, my children, Carl, even my father, but when it came time for me to be supported, I was left out in the cold. I stepped back, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. Carl had to know that the condo wasn't just ours, it was mine too. It was part of my inheritance from my father, the man who had worked hard his whole life to provide for me, and yet in this moment it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. I turned away from the door, my eyes filling with tears, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Carl the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Not now, not ever. As I walked away, I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed. The life I had built, the dreams I had shared with Carl. It all felt like a lie now. The betrayal wasn't just about the condo. It was about the years of silence, the years of Carl prioritizing everything and everyone except me. He had always been distant, but this was different. This was the final straw. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me anymore. My father's death had opened my eyes to the truth. If I didn't stand up for myself now, I might never get another chance. I didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Carl think he could get away with this. I was done being the silent wife, the one who just accepted whatever came her way. No, I was going to fight for what was mine. I wasn't going to let Carl rob me of my future, just like he had tried to rob me of my past. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, trying to steady my hands. The cold from the night before had seeped into my bones, and my mind was still reeling from what happened at my father's funeral. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the one Carl always sat in. How had it come to this? How had I gone from the woman who helped build everything with Carl, the woman who stood by him through thick and thin, to being treated like I didn't exist? I had spent years taking care of our family, keeping our home in perfect order, raising our children, and supporting Carl in every way I could. But now it felt like all of that meant nothing. I thought about what happened at the funeral. Carl locking me out of the condo was just the final blow, but it wasn't the first time he had acted this way. The signs were always there, hidden behind the comfort of our wealth and the busy life we led. There had always been distance between us, but I had convinced myself it was just a phase. Maybe he was tired, or maybe I was imagining it. But no, the truth was right there in front of me. Carl didn't care. He never cared enough. After all these years, after everything we had built together, he was still only thinking about himself. I tried calling him that night after I left the condo. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again the next morning and still nothing. The silence was deafening. I wasn't sure if it was because he didn't want to talk to me, or if he was just too busy with his own life to care. Either way, I was beginning to see things for what they really were. As I walked through the house that day, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The rooms that once felt warm and full of life now seemed cold and empty. The memories of the life Carl and I had shared now felt like ghosts haunting me. I walked into the living room, my eyes landing on the framed photo of us from our wedding day. I couldn't help but wonder, how did we get here? How did I go from being the woman he promised to love forever to someone he couldn't even look in the eye? The anger I had been pushing down for so long started to bubble up again. But this time it wasn't just anger. It was a sense of clarity. I was done. Done with being invisible. Done with being treated like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to let Carl take everything from me, not anymore. The condo, the inheritance my father had left me, it was mine. I had every right to it. Carl thought he could shut me out and walk away with everything, but I wasn't going to let him. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't wait for Carl to come to his senses or hope he'd change. No, I had to take control of the situation myself. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. It was time to make things right. As I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, I thought about all the things Carl had said over the years. How he had always promised me that we would grow old together, that we would enjoy the fruits of our labor. But those promises meant nothing now. It was all a lie, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. My heart ached with the weight of it all. But there was something else there too, something I hadn't felt in a long time: strength. I wasn't going to sit back and let Carl take what was mine. I wasn't going to let him push me aside like I didn't matter. I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine. The lawyer confirmed that the condo was legally mine, and that there were steps I could take to regain control. The news gave me some peace of mind, but I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Carl would fight me. He would try everything he could to keep what he thought was his. But I was ready for that. I wasn't going to let him bully me anymore. I wasn't going to let him win. As I sat there in the silence, waiting for my next step, I realized something important. I was no longer the woman who had let Carl walk all over her. I was no longer the woman who had silently accepted whatever life handed her. No, I was Gloria Matthews, and I was going to take back what was mine. The next few days passed in a blur, each one heavier than the last. I tried to focus on the task at hand, getting the condo back, but the emotional toll was starting to wear me down. Every time I walked through the house, the weight of Carl's betrayal felt like a stone in my chest. I couldn't escape the silence, the memories of our life together that now seemed like a lie. I spent most of my time in the study making phone calls, going over legal documents, and trying to get everything in place. But even then I couldn't stop thinking about what Carl had done. It wasn't just the condo. It was everything, the years of neglect, the subtle ways he had pushed me aside. I thought about how we used to be, how we once laughed together, how we talked about our future. Those conversations seemed so distant now. I hadn't heard from Carl since that night. At the condo, he had texted a few times, but every message felt like a slap in the face. The words were cold, detached. He asked if I was okay, as if locking me out of my own home was something he could apologize for with a few simple words. I didn't respond. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the one who supported him no matter what. But now I was done. I wasn't going to be the one to fix things anymore. I was done trying to make him see me, done trying to make him care. The condo was just the tipping point. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had put up with over the years. It wasn't just the big things, the way he ignored me when I needed him, the way he always chose his career over our family. It was the small things too, the everyday moments where I felt invisible. The way he'd come home from work and never ask about my day. The way he'd take the last piece of dessert without even thinking about offering it to me. The way he'd talk over me in conversations, acting like my opinion didn't matter. Those things add up, and I had allowed them to build up for far too long. Now I had to face the truth. I had spent years living in a marriage that wasn't truly fulfilling. A marriage where I was nothing more than an accessory to Carl's life. I had let him treat me like I was disposable, like my needs and wants didn't matter. But now I was starting to see the bigger picture. Carl wasn't just trying to control the condo. He had been trying to control me for years. He thought I wouldn't fight back, that I would just accept whatever he gave me whenever he decided to give it. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him have the condo or my dignity or my future. I was going to take back what was mine. It wasn't just about the condo, it was about standing up for myself, about refusing to let Carl take everything from me. I had spent too long trying to please him, trying to fit into his world. Now it was time for me to create my own world, one where I had control. As the days went on, I started making plans. I called my lawyer again, going over the next steps to secure my claim on the condo. I knew Carl would fight me every step of the way, but I was ready for that. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me, not anymore. I had spent too long living in fear of his anger, too long letting him dictate the terms of my life. Now I was in control. As I hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making progress. I had a plan. I knew what I had to do. I was going to fight for the condo, for my inheritance, for my dignity. And I wasn't going to back down. As the days passed, the silence between Carl and I grew louder. He hadn't called, hadn't apologized, and hadn't tried to make amends. It was as if I didn't even exist anymore. It wasn't just the condo, it was everything. The way Carl had treated me over the years suddenly felt like a pattern, a deliberate attempt to erase me from his life. I had spent so many years caring for him, for our family, yet when it came down to it, I was nothing more than an afterthought. I spent the next few days in a haze, dealing with lawyers, gathering documents, and slowly piecing together my plan. But with every phone call I made, every piece of paperwork I reviewed, it became clearer Carl wasn't going to give up without a fight. And that was just the beginning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much he had taken from me, how much I had allowed him to take. The condo was just the latest betrayal, but it wasn't the first. There had been so many little moments over the years when Carl had made me feel invisible, insignificant. It started with the small things, the way he'd brush me off when I tried to talk to him about something important, how he'd always prioritize work over spending time with me, the way he'd leave for business trips and not even bother to check in. I used to think it was just part of life, part of being married to a successful businessman. But now I saw it for what it was. It was neglect. It was selfishness. And I had tolerated it for far too long. I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of our family, for the sake of Carl's career, for the sake of our children. I had put everyone else's needs before my own, and in doing so, I had lost myself. I had lost the woman I used to be, the woman who was strong, independent, and knew her worth. But no more. I wasn't going to sit back and let Carl take everything from me, not anymore. I wasn't going to let him think he could control me, that he could walk all over me without consequences. I had made a decision. I was going to fight, not just for the condo but for myself, for the woman I had once been and the woman I was going to become again. I wasn't going to be Carl's doormat anymore. I wasn't going to be the silent wife who just accepted whatever he dished out. No, I was going to stand up for myself. I was going to take back my life, my dignity, my future. And I wasn't going to let Carl's manipulation define me anymore. The first step was simple. I had to make it clear to Carl that I wasn't going to be silenced. I wasn't going to let him win. I called him that afternoon. The phone rang a few times before he finally picked up. "Gloria," he said, his voice flat, detached. "What do you want?" I felt a sharp pang of hurt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about hurt anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. "I want what's mine," I said, my voice steady, strong. "The condo. It's mine, and I'm not going to let you take it from me." There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost hear Carl's mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, he spoke. "You don't know what you're asking for, Gloria," he said, his tone cold. "You really want to go to war over this?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Yes," I said. "Ido. I'm done letting you control everything. I'm done letting you make the decisions. For me. I'm done being the invisible wife. I'm taking back what's mine, Carl. And I'm not backing down." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Carl didn't know how to respond. He had always been the one in control, always the one making the decisions. But this time I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me anymore. The conversation ended shortly after that, with Carl's last words hanging in the air. "We'll see," he said before hanging up. But I knew then, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. I had taken the first step. And no matter how hard Carl tried to fight me, I was ready. I wasn't going to let him take my future. Not this time. The days following our conversation were quiet, almost eerily so. I went through the motions of my daily routine, dealing with the necessary arrangements for the condo, keeping my focus sharp. But underneath it all, my mind was constantly racing. Carl's indifference, the way he shut me out so easily, was still haunting me. The house that once felt like home now felt like a prison. The empty rooms, the cold walls, everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of how I had been ignored and pushed aside. The loneliness that had settled in my chest was heavy, but I wasn't going to let it break me. I knew what I had to do, and I couldn't afford to get distracted by the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Carl may have locked me out, but I wasn't going to let him lock me out of my future. I spent hours with my lawyer going over every detail, making sure I had a solid case. The more I learned about my rights, the more empowered I felt. I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a woman with a plan. A woman who had worked hard for everything she had. I wasn't going to let Carl take it from me without a fight. The phone rang one morning as I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I knew it was Carl. I hadn't spoken to him since our last conversation, and I wasn't sure what to expect. His voice was colder than usual, almost as if he were trying to control the situation from a distance. "Gloria," he said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath before responding. "I agree," I said, my voice calm, steady. "We need to talk about what's going to happen with the condo." There was a brief silence on the other end. I could almost hear him trying to compose himself, probably realizing that I wasn't backing down. "You really think you can just take it from me?" Carl asked, his voice laced with frustration. "You're overreacting. This isn't how things are supposed to go." His words stung, but I didn't let them show. I had heard this before, the dismissive tone, the attempt to make me doubt myself. But not anymore. "No, Carl," I said, my voice firm. "You're the one who's overreacting. You can't just take what's mine, and I'm not going to let you. The condo was my father's and now it's mine. And I'm going to make sure I keep it." The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours, but in reality it was only a few seconds. I could tell Carl was taken aback. He hadn't expected me to stand up for myself like this. He thought I would just let him have his way, as I always had before. But that was over. "Fine," he finally said, his voice low. "We'll see about that." And with that, the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. Carl had made his move, and now it was my turn. I had been patient for far too long. But now I wasn't going to wait any longer. I wasn't going to let Carl dictate my future. The next few days were a whirlwind. I went over the legal paperwork again, met with my lawyer a few more times, and made sure everything was in order. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. But despite all the preparations, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Carl wasn't going to give up easily, and I knew he'd do whatever it took to keep control. But I wasn't going to let him. As the days went by, I began to feel more and more confident. I had taken the first step, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me now. I had always been the one who held everything together, taking care of Carl, our children, the house. But now it was time to take care of myself. It was time to take control of my own life, my own destiny. The final meeting with my lawyer was the turning point. We went over the last details, signed the necessary documents, and prepared to present my case. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I left the office, but there was something else too. Something that had been missing for so long: hope. I had hope again, hope for a future that was mine to shape. I wasn't going to let Carl take that from me. I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The battle for the condo was just the beginning. But I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I focused on getting the condo back, each step feeling like a victory in itself. Yet the weight of Carl's betrayal was always in the back of my mind. There were moments when I felt a flicker of doubt, but I quickly pushed those thoughts aside. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Carl dictate the terms of my life anymore. It wasn't just about the condo anymore. It was about standing up for myself, asserting my worth, and reclaiming the life I had once built with him. Each time I spoke with my lawyer, I felt a little more confident. But when I received Carl's next message, it hit me like a ton of bricks. The text was short, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. "I've decided to sell the condo. You'll get your cut, but I'm done with this." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Carl had crossed a line. Not just in taking what was mine, but in making decisions about the condo without even consulting me. The condo wasn't just an asset. It was part of my father's legacy, part of the life my family had worked so hard to build. I wasn't going to let Carl just sell it off like it meant nothing. I knew this was the moment I had to act. I called my lawyer immediately, explaining the situation. "We have to stop him," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "He can't just sell it. I'm entitled to this, and he's trying to take everything." My lawyer reassured me that we could put a stop to it, but it would take time. The legal process would be slow, but we had a solid case. I didn't care about the timeline. I needed to take control, and I needed to do it fast. The days felt longer as I waited for the legal paperwork to be processed. I spent my time planning, trying to figure out what my next steps would be. But the silence between Carl and I was suffocating. He had stopped trying to contact me, and I had stopped trying to reach out to him. The only thing that mattered now was the condo and getting it back. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Carl had always treated me like an afterthought, a shadow in his life. I had spent so many years doing everything for him, taking care of the house, the kids, our life, and in return I was left with nothing. The realization hit me harder than I had expected. I had been living in a house of cards, holding everything together while Carl did whatever he wanted. And now everything was falling apart. But this time I wasn't going to let it. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me, not without a fight. The day I received the final legal documents, everything came to a head. My lawyer called to let me know that the paperwork had been filed, and that Carl's attempt to sell the condo had been stopped. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of the condo and Carl. I wasn't sure what to expect when I finally confronted him. Would he admit to his mistakes? Would he apologize? Or would he continue to deny everything? The moment of truth arrived when I walked into our home, ready to face him. Carl was sitting in the living room, looking as calm and collected as ever. He didn't even look surprised when I walked in. "Gloria," he said, his voice flat. "I didn't expect you to show up here." I didn't say anything at first. I simply stood there, taking in the man I had spent so many years with. He looked different now, somehow colder, more distant. I could see it in his eyes. He no longer cared about me, about us, about anything that had mattered to me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my voice steady. "I'm here to take back what's mine," I said. "The condo is mine, Carl. And you're not going to sell it without my permission." For the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "This isn't just about the condo. It's about us, Gloria. It's about what we've become." I shook my head, cutting him off. "No, Carl. This isn't about us anymore. It's about me. It's about my father's legacy. It's about standing up for what's rightfully mine." Carl looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to gauge my resolve. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I never thought you'd fight for it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I should have known better." I looked him in the eye and said, "You underestimated me, Carl. I'm not going to let you take everything from me." There was a long silence between us, but it didn't matter. The fight wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was mine. It had been a week since I last spoke to Carl, and I could feel the tension building in the air. Every day that passed, I grew more resolute in my decision. The condo wasn't just about the money or the property, it was a symbol. It was a symbol of everything Carl had tried to take from me, and it was a symbol of me finally standing up for myself. I had spent years quietly tolerating his indifference, his dismissiveness, his disregard for everything that truly mattered to me. But not anymore. I was done being that woman. I had learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment, but now I wasn't waiting any longer. I had already taken the first step by getting the legal paperwork in motion, and I was determined to see it through. Every conversation with my lawyer brought me a step closer, but every time I saw Carl, the knot in my stomach tightened. I had always been the one to smooth things over, the one who kept the peace. But now, peace was the last thing on my mind. This wasn't about making amends or finding a compromise. This was about standing my ground. When I walked into the living room that afternoon, Carl was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He looked up at me briefly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. It was as if I had become nothing more than a shadow to him. For a moment I considered turning around and walking away, avoiding another confrontation. But I couldn't. I had to do this. For me. For my future. Carl, I said, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk. He didn't answer at first. He just looked at me with that detached expression that had become so familiar. About what? He asked, almost as if he were bored by the very idea of speaking to me. The condo, I said, stepping closer. I'm not backing down. You don't get to make decisions about it without me. Carl's eyes narrowed. You still don't get it, do you? He said, his voice laced with frustration. This isn't just about the condo. It's about everything. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It's about us, Gloria, Carl said, as if the words had no meaning. It's about our marriage. It's about how I've carried everything while you've just sat back and let me. His words stung, but I didn't let him see it. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. No, Carl, I said, standing taller. This is about you thinking you could take everything from me. It's about you shutting me out of the life we built together. It's about you not caring about anything but yourself. His expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. I didn't want things to end this way, he said, his voice softer, almost pleading. But you made it impossible. You've always been so controlling, so demanding. I couldn't take it anymore. I shook my head, refusing to back down. You don't get to play the victim here, Carl. You don't get to blame me for your mistakes. You've been pushing me away for years, and now you're acting like it's my fault. He stood up, his face reddening with anger. I'm tired of this, Gloria, he said, his voice rising. You're making everything so much harder than it needs to be. No, I replied, my voice steady and unyielding. You've made it harder, Carl. You've always made it harder. But not anymore. I'm done letting you control me. I'm done being your pawn. I'm taking what's mine, and you can't stop me. The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the anger and frustration in Carl's eyes, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about him. This was about me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of what he would say or what he would do. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let him silence me again. We'll see about that, Carl muttered, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just take the condo, but it's not that simple. I didn't flinch. I know it's not that simple. But I'm not backing down, Carl. Not this time. I turned to leave, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't letting Carl's words control me. I was taking control of my own life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. As I walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The fight wasn't over yet, but I was ready. I had made up my mind. I was going to fight for what was mine, and nothing was going to stop me. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but as I sat in the waiting room, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. My lawyer had reassured me that we had a strong case, but I knew Carl wouldn't give up without a fight. He had always been the one in control, always the one making the decisions. But today that was going to change. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my nerves in check. The sound of my heartbeat seemed to echo in my ears, drowning out everything else around me. The courthouse felt colder than I had imagined, and every step I took toward the courtroom felt heavier than the last. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. As we walked into the courtroom, I felt a surge of determination flood through me. I wasn't going to back down now. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I could feel Carl's presence as we entered, his cold stare fixed on me as if daring me to challenge him. His attorney was already seated, looking confident, but I wasn't intimidated. I had spent too many years being pushed around by Carl, too many years trying to please him and keep the peace. But not anymore. This was my fight. The hearing began, and the lawyer for Carl spoke first, presenting his case. He tried to paint me as someone who was being unreasonable, someone who was fighting over something that wasn't even mine to begin with. But I wasn't going to let him control the narrative. When it was my turn, I stood tall, my voice steady as I spoke. The condo is mine, I said. It was part of my inheritance from my late father, and I have every right to it. I felt the weight of Carl's gaze on me, but I refused to let it shake me. I had to be strong, for myself and for my father's legacy. Carl has tried to manipulate me for years, I continued. He has always been in control, always made the decisions, and I've had enough. I'm not going to let him take what's rightfully mine. My words seemed to hit Carl like a punch to the gut. His face reddened with anger, but I didn't back down. I kept my focus on the lawyer, who nodded in acknowledgement of my statement. I had made my point, and I wasn't going to let Carl's tantrums distract me. The rest of the hearing was a blur. My lawyer presented the documents, proving that the condo was rightfully mine. Carl's lawyer tried to poke holes in the evidence, but it was clear that their case was crumbling. I could see Carl's frustration growing with every passing minute, and it only fueled my determination. The final ruling came an hour later. I held my breath as the judge spoke. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, I find in favor of Mrs. Matthews. The condo is her property, and any actions taken to sell it without her consent are invalid. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a rush of emotions. I had done it. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. Carl sat there, stunned, his face pale as the reality of the situation set in. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, of power. The life Carl had tried to build without me, the life he thought he could take from me, it was all falling apart. As I walked out of the courtroom, my heart lightened with every step. The battle wasn't over, but this was a victory. It was mine. And no one was going to take it from me. The weeks following the ruling were some of the most peaceful I had felt in a long time. The condo was finally mine again, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant weight of Carl's presence, his manipulation, his disregard for everything I had worked so hard for. I spent those weeks slowly rebuilding my life, not just around the condo but around me. It was a strange feeling, taking back control after so long of being controlled by someone else. It wasn't easy. I still had moments of doubt, still caught myself second-guessing my decisions. But every day, I grew stronger, more confident in the woman I was becoming. I spent more time in the condo. The place that had once felt like a prison now became a sanctuary. I had loved it when my father had it, and now it was my space, a place where I could breathe freely without the constant reminder of Carl's expectations and demands. I began to notice small things again, the way the light filtered through the windows in the morning, the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the city outside. It was as if the world was coming back to life just as I was. Carl, however, didn't take my victory lying down. He tried to contact me a few times, sending me messages that ranged from cold to pleading, but I didn't respond. I had said everything I needed to say to him. There was nothing left to discuss. It became clear that Carl wasn't willing to just let me go. But that was his problem now. I had spent years trying to make things work with him, trying to fix something that was never meant to be fixed. Now I was focused on myself, on what came next. It wasn't just about the condo anymore. It was about me finding my own happiness, my own path. Slowly, I started reaching out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I started reconnecting with the person I had been before Carl. I hadn't realized how much I had lost myself in that marriage, in that life. But now I was starting to find pieces of me that I had forgotten about. It was like rediscovering an old friend. I felt free, and I realized that I had been free all along. The only thing that had been holding me back was myself. As I continued to rebuild, I began to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it head-on and walking through the fire. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. But more importantly, I had fought for myself. I was no longer the woman who hid behind Carl's shadow. I was Gloria Matthews, and I was taking my life back. There were still days when I felt the sting of the past, the echoes of the life I had once thought was everything. But those days were fewer and farther between. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time I could see it clearly. I didn't know exactly what that future held, but for the first time in years I was excited to find out. The condo was just the beginning. I had regained my independence, my sense of self, and now I was ready to live life on my own terms. I had always been strong. I had always been capable. I had just forgotten it for a while. But now I remembered. And nothing was going to take that away from me.